I never thought that taking the job at the St. Elmo Lighthouse would be my worst mistake. Now, caught in a storm that seems to be conjured by demons, I understand that something more than the wind whispers my name every night. When I saw the ad in an old newspaper, something about it called to me deeply. It promised a secluded retreat, ideal for someone like me, seeking to escape the chaos of urban life and reconnect with something deeper, something true. I arrived on the island one cool September morning. The sea was calm, and the air carried a hint of salt and mystery. The lighthouse stood majestically on the promontory, a white and blue tower that was lost in the cloudy sky. The man in charge of greeting me was an old sailor, whose name, Edgar, was lost in the folds of his gray beard. In a gruff voice and little more than a grunt, he warned me of the responsibilities of the post, but his eyes seemed to conceal a graver warning, one he dared not vocalize. That first night, after bidding farewell to Edgar, who hurried back to the mainland before the tide prevented him, I found myself truly alone. The lighthouse was working almost automatically, and my task was simply to make sure it stayed that way. But as the sun set and darkness enveloped the land, an uneasy feeling came over me. There were no noises apart from the wind and the waves crashing against the cliffs. However, as I settled into the small hut at the foot of the lighthouse, the first whispers began to become audible. They were barely perceptible at first, like the rubbing of silk against old wood, but gradually they became clearer, more insistent. It was not words I was hearing, but breaths, the echo of presences I could not see but felt ever closer. I clutched tightly the only relic I had brought with me, an old compass from my grandfather, and tried to remember why I had come here. But as the night wore on, the true nature of St. Elmo's began to reveal itself, and I, ignorant of its secrets, was just beginning to understand that some places hold their own ghosts, and not all wish to be forgotten. With each night I spent at the St. Elmo Lighthouse, the whispers grew louder, as if they were crescendos of an unheard symphony meant only for my ears. It wasn't just formless voices that disturbed my tranquility. Shadows began to appear in the confines of my vision, figures that vanished as soon as I tried to focus on them. I wondered if loneliness was playing tricks with my mind, but deep down I knew there was something else, something ancient and forgotten lurking on the island. One morning, while inspecting the lighthouse base, I found an old, dust-covered journal in a forgotten corner of the engine room. The pages were yellowed and the leather covering it was worn by time. Curious, I opened it and discovered that it had belonged to one of St. Elmo's first lighthouse keepers. The entries began in a routine manner, describing the weather and daily chores. As the pages turned, however, the lighthouse keeper's tone became more erratic. He spoke of voices in the fog, of figures on the periphery of the island, and of a growing sense of despair that consumed him. Armed with the new information, I decided to explore the island in search of answers. The day was gray and a thin veil of fog was beginning to descend, almost palpable, touching everything with its cold fingers. As I walked along the rocky path that bordered the cliff, the feeling of being watched grew. The mist grew thicker with each step he took, until he could barely see beyond a few feet. Suddenly, a figure materialized in front of me in the mist. It was a man, tall and thin, with clothes worn by time. His face was almost as pale as the mist that surrounded us, and his eyes, dark and deep, seemed to look right through me. Before I could speak, the man disappeared as quickly as he had appeared, leaving only the echo of a word that echoed through the fog: search. Dazed but determined, I pressed on, guided by a need to understand what forces were stirring beneath the apparent tranquility of St. Elmo's. With each step, the whispers returned, clearer now, leading me deeper into the dark heart of the island. As I moved deeper into the island, the terrain became uneven and wild, overgrown with moss and vines that seemed to hold secrets of the past. The fog, my constant companion, thickened with each step I took inland, as if trying to hide something that should not be discovered. The twisted trees formed a natural tunnel, their intertwining branches creating a shadowy vault over my head. The sound of my own footsteps echoed strangely muffled under the blanket of mist. Eventually, I came to an old, half-ruined stone building that appeared to be all that remained of an ancient chapel. The stones were covered with lichen, and the remains of what were once stained glass windows lay scattered around, glowing faintly under the meager light that filtered through the fog. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, almost as if the stones themselves were talking to each other, narrating forgotten stories of times past. Inside the chapel, the air was cold and charged with the echo of ancient prayers. In the center, among the rubble, I discovered a half-open crypt that appeared to have been recently excavated. My heart pounded in my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to retreat, but curiosity pushed me forward. I knelt down to examine the crypt more closely and noticed that, on its stone lid, were engraved inscriptions that spoke of a guardian and a seal. Almost breathlessly, I cleared away more of the dirt surrounding the crypt, revealing more of the inscription. It read, "Here lies the guardian, the one whose life was given to keep the seal intact. May his sacrifice not be disturbed, for if the seal is broken, the veil will fall and the darkness will be released." As he read, a cold wind blew through the broken structure, carrying with it a chorus of voices that now cried out urgently. The atmosphere tightened, as if the mere reading of those words had activated some ancestral mechanism. I felt an overwhelming presence around me, pressing against reality itself. At that moment, I understood that there was something deeper and more terrifying on the island than I had ever imagined, and that perhaps I had made a grave mistake in coming here. But now, caught in the trap of my own curiosity, I knew I had no choice but to go ahead and face what lay behind the seal that the Guardian had protected for centuries. Driven by a mixture of fear and determination, I decided to explore the crypt further. The chapel, with its ruins whispering ancient secrets, seemed like the core of the island, a place where all the mystical and tenebrous energy I had felt since I had arrived was concentrated. With each step I took toward the crypt, the temperature dropped, as if descending into the depths of an invisible abyss. I carefully descended a narrow stone staircase that seemed to lead to the heart of the earth. The walls were damp and mossy, and the air was thick with a smell of wet earth and something else, a metallic tinge that made me think of blood. My only guides were the faint beam of my flashlight and the distant echoes of whispers that now seemed like clear voices, though I did not understand their words. At the top of the stairs, I found a wide subway corridor stretching into the darkness. The walls were adorned with strange symbols I did not recognize, etched deep into the stone, glowing faintly with what seemed to be a light of their own, iridescent. These symbols, arranged in a pattern that suggested a ceremonial purpose, seemed to vibrate subtly at the contact of my flashlight's light. As I moved forward, the whispers grew in intensity, becoming a deafening chorus that echoed in the recesses of my mind. I began to feel fear intertwine with fascination. Each new discovery pushed me further, deeper into the bowels of the island. Suddenly, the corridor opened into a vast subway chamber. At its center, surrounded by a series of erect stones reminiscent of a miniature Stonehenge circle, lay a black stone altar. On the altar, remnants of what appeared to be past offerings, scraps of faded cloth, bleached bones and dark stains I didn't want to identify, bore witness to ancient and possibly obscure rituals. The atmosphere in the chamber was electric, charged with an energy that made the air vibrate around me. In front of the altar, there was a large relief on the wall depicting a battle between human figures and monstrous shadows, some of which seemed to escape from the confines of the relief, as if they were about to flood the real world. At that moment, I understood that these rituals were not mere superstitions, they were warnings and protections against something genuinely terrifying and powerful that was confined, until now, to this island. The presence I felt was overwhelming, as if the walls themselves were breathing with dark life, watching me, assessing me. I had to make a decision, to step back and forget what I had seen or to delve even deeper into the forbidden secrets this island jealously guarded. Determined to confront whatever lurked in the depths of this forgotten island, I advanced toward the altar, my footsteps echoing in the sepulchral silence that had now settled in the chamber. As I approached, the air grew thicker, almost palpable, as if the darkness itself was trying to dissuade me from my purpose. I began to examine more closely the objects on the altar, and among them I found an ancient book, its leather covers worn and the title barely legible. I opened it carefully, fearing that it would crumble in my hands. The pages, written in a mixture of various ancient alphabets, some of which I recognized as archaic variants of Norse runes and Celtic symbols, told the story of the island. According to the manuscript, the island had been a place of exile for an ancestral entity, a creature of unimaginable powers that had threatened the world in ancient times. Druids and priests of various cultures had joined forces to confine it here, using the stone circle as a focus for its imprisonment. As I absorbed the magnitude of this revelation, a cold wind picked up in the chamber, blowing out my flashlight and leaving me in complete darkness. I heard a whisper growing in volume, a voice that did not sound human, rumbling against the stone walls. "Release me," the voice said, in a tone that wavered between pleading and command. I slammed the book shut, startled. The temperature dropped even further, and I felt the presence of something immense moving in the darkness. The entity was aware of me, of my presence, as if my arrival had disturbed a millennia-old balance. With the darkness lurking, palpable and alive all around me, I realized I had to act quickly. My mind raced for some solution, some way to reinforce the seal the ancients had placed and prevent the entity from breaking free. I knew the book must hold the key, but with the lantern off, the only source of light was the iridescent symbols on the walls. Guided by the faint light of these symbols, I began to search the book for some indication or ritual that might help. Each passing page increased the urgency of the voice calling me, now mixed with threats and promises of unbridled power and endless terror. It was clear that I was at the center of an ancient conflict, with the balance of power swaying dangerously. The story of the island, far from being a mere legend, was a critical warning. I had come to seek the mystery, and now I found myself caught in its web, struggling to avoid a catastrophe that could transcend the barrier of this isolated piece of land. In the depths of the crypt, with the cold chilling me to the bone and the darkness enveloping me, the urgency of the situation pushed me into an almost frantic state. The voice, now a chorus of discordant whispers, continued its litany, growing more and more insistent. Ignoring it as best I could, I concentrated on the book, using the luminescence of the symbols on the walls to decipher its contents. Finally, among the yellowed pages and musty smell of the book, I found what appeared to be a sealing ritual. The details were elusive, written in an ancient dialect I could barely understand, but the illustrations were clear. They showed a specific pattern of stones around the altar, and symbols to be traced on the ground with a mixture of ashes and salt. I hurried to gather the materials that were scattered around the chamber, small piles of ashes that the ancients left behind, perhaps as part of their rituals, and a bowl of salt that seemed to have stood the test of time. Following the drawn instructions, I began to trace the symbols on the ground, each line and curve a challenge to the growing oppression of the air. As I drew, whispers turned to howls, and an icy wind began to blow into the chamber, trying to erase the lines I was tracing. But I didn't stop. Each completed symbol seemed to strengthen the invisible barrier that kept the entity at bay. Finished with the last symbol, I recited the archaic words the text dictated, my voice trembling but steady in the darkness. The air became charged with electricity, and a faint glow began to emanate from the floor, illuminating the chamber with a pale but steady light. The clamor in the darkness reached a crescendo, a furious scream that shook the foundations of the crypt, and then, silence. A deep, absolute silence, as if the entire island had held its breath. The glow from the ground intensified and then began to diminish, until all that remained was the soft glow of protective symbols on the walls. Exhausted but relieved, I leaned back against the altar, feeling normalcy slowly begin to return to the place. The seal was restored, the entity contained once more. But I knew that what I had done was only a temporary solution. True safeguarding would require more than ancient rituals and the courage of one man. With the book in hand, I decided that my next step would be to seek out experts who could better understand and perhaps permanently reinforce the seals. I could not allow what was almost released tonight to have another chance. With that resolve, I began the trek back through the fog to the safety of my ship, knowing that my relationship with the island was far from over. On the way to my ship, the fog began to dissipate in a way I had not seen since arriving on the island. The sun was emerging on the horizon, painting the sky a blood red that seemed to resonate with the events of the night. As I reached the shore, however, I came upon a lone figure waiting by my boat, staring out to sea. He was an elderly man, dressed in clothes worn by time and salt. His gaze, intense and knowing, fixed on me as I approached. Before I could greet him or ask who he was, he began to speak in a voice that carried the weight of ancient knowledge. "You have done well to restore the seal, but the solution you seek is not to be found in ancient rituals or mainland sages," he said serenely. "The island chose you, not only as its temporary protector but as its guardian. What you contain is not just an evil entity, but the guardian spirit of this place, corrupted by those who tried to exploit it before you." Surprised by his words, I tried to process what he was saying. "How is this possible? And how do you know all this?" "My family has cared for this island for generations, until personal misfortunes took me away from my duty. I have watched from afar, waiting for the right time to intervene again," he explained, his gaze drifting to the island with a mixture of pain and hope. "The book you found contains more than rituals, it is a compendium of the island's history and its true nature. The entity you sealed, in its pure form, protects this place and those who respect its sacredness." Then, he pulled from his pocket an amulet, ancient and weathered by time, showing it to me. This amulet belonged to the ancient guardians of the island. "Now it is yours. With it, you will have the ability to communicate and calm the spirit without the need for sealing rituals." I took the amulet, feeling an instant connection, a calmness that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the night before. "So what am I supposed to do now?" I asked, still in disbelief. "Live here, learn about the island and protect its essence. In time, you will understand how to fully restore the guardian to its original state. You will not be alone in this, my time as guardian has passed, but I will remain to guide you until you can fully assume your role." As the sun rose fully, dispelling the last vestiges of fog, I accepted the destiny the island had mapped out for me. Not only had I found a purpose beyond my initial quest for adventure and mystery, but I had discovered a legacy I never imagined I would assume. With the old guardian at my side, I began the first day of my new life on the island, amidst the whispers of the wind and the promises of dawns to come.